This November, conservatives could be poised for big wins in Kansas and Nebraska in state school board races. And I know we've got a lot of listeners in Kansas and Nebraska. All right, I hope you are prepared to vote. Now, in these two states, along with Alabama, Colorado, Michigan, Texas, and Utah, it's the voters who elect their state school board members. Now, what are the issues animating conservatives in these two states? Well, here to break all this down for us, Meg Kilgannon, Senior Fellow for Education Studies at the Family Research Council. She served in the Department of Education during the Trump administration. Meg, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Tony.
So I know everybody's focused on the presidential, but I keep repeating, look, there's more things here. We've got Senate races, we have congressional races, we have state legislative races, we have statewide offices, we have school boards, we have state boards of education. Tell us what's happening in Kansas and Nebraska.
Yeah, there are school board races for your local school board in those states, but also your state board of education is actually an elected office in those two states. And so there are so many reasons why Christians need to go out and vote. One of the reasons that this is important at the state level is because of issues like social emotional learning and what is your sex education curriculum? What are your standards of education regarding social studies and English language? And all of those kinds of policies are set at the state level. So who is making those policies is very important. Do they share your worldview? Are they Christians? Are they conservatives? Do they believe that parents are the fundamentally first educators of children? These are things that you want to find out, and that there's so many important issues facing our kids today, and these folks on these boards have a really meaningful impact in people's lives.
And this is not missed by the left. I was reading an AP story, an Associated Press story, and here's the first sentence actually. At issue are familiar efforts by conservative Republicans and groups to limit what K through 12 schools can teach about racism, diversity, sexuality, and gender. You know, what if education just actually focused on education, on the core tools like reading, like math, like science, those things that are needed to succeed in the workforce?
Absolutely. I was looking through the websites of these two boards of education, and I have to say that it was refreshing coming from a school board, a school system that's very progressive. It was nice to see them focusing on things like workforce readiness and literacy and the ability to make math calculations. They seem to be very practical in those states. And I would say that the voters in those states had better get out and vote and make sure it stays that way, because the pressure is always to the left and it is always very strong. So that's why the AP would bother to write an article like this about the school boards in Kansas and Nebraska, because they are only happy when liberals are in charge of children's education.
Right. I mean, we're going to talk more about this in the next segment with our colleague Joseph Backholm and what's happening with churches across the country. But ever since COVID, you know, one of the silver linings there to COVID was the fact that parents all of a sudden realize what was happening to their kids and what they were being taught, how much time was wasted, and so on and so forth. So we've seen a rise in homeschooling. We've seen a rise in private education. And then, of course, because of elections, this happens because of elections, we've had governors and state legislatures that have created voucher programs that have enabled the growth in educational choice. So this is hopeful for the future. Now, we've got some battles to fight today, but if we want to get some future leaders in the pipeline who have basic skills to succeed and have not been indoctrinated, this is where we start.
Absolutely. And to the point you're going to talk about in the next segment with Joseph, there is a ballot initiative on the ballot in Nebraska to repeal the school choice options that they currently have. So if you care about education and you're enjoying a school choice program in that state, or you want your grandchildren to be able to enjoy a school choice program in that state, you better get out and vote. There's so many things on the Nebraska ballot. I was astounded at the number of things there are to vote for in addition addition to the presidential race. They have a very tight Senate race there, but you can elect your University of Nebraska Board of Regents. Those are appointed in my state, but in Nebraska you can elect them. You can elect your state Supreme Court, these state Board of Education races. You have the ballot initiative on school choice, and then the 2 ballot initiatives on abortion there. I mean, Christians really need to make their voices heard in these states. And the same thing in Kansas. There are your entire state legislative bodies are up in those states. They're elected in presidential years. There are ballot questions. We really need for Christians to engage in this fight because our children are worth it.
So let me just ask you this question. You know, Meg, there are people saying, you know, I'm just so tired of the negative. I'm not really excited about my choices. Look, that's a pathetic excuse for not engaging in the process. We need to vote biblical values. That means we've got to look to see who is most closely aligned to those values. They're not going to be perfect. In some cases, you're going to have some really good choices at the state level. Nationally, maybe not so much so. But we have done the homework for you in our voter toolkit that will help you see very clear contrast. There is a contrast between the two parties and the two major candidates running for president. People, you need to vote. Meg, the future depends on Christians turning out and voting those values because that is what will shape the future.
If you're not happy with the choices you have right now, that is more reason for you to go out and make your voice heard. It's not less of a reason. The whole way that this country is founded and can run itself is based on a government of, by, and for the people.
That's right.
So people need to vote, and we must vote our values.
Right.
This isn't the time to, be picky.
No.
You need to be discerning and be active.
Vote for those candidates that most closely align to biblical values. And folks, we've got that resource for you. Text Toolkit to 67742. Meg Kilgannon, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.